This is the Dreamers Podcast, episode 19. Today is June 1st, 2021. Hello, world. Welcome to the Dreamers Podcast. I am Stephanie Anne-Lyse, also known as Anne-Lyse Wealth. I am a financial coach and an author. I self-published my first book, Dream of Legacy, a guide to help dreamers reach financial independence and build generational wealth. In this podcast, I'll have conversations with experts and thought leaders who dare to follow their dreams. You'll hear about their journey and their money stories. I hope it inspires you, dreamers out there, to live life on your own terms.
Come on, dreamers, let's change the world!
This episode is brought to you by Dream of Legacy. Check out dreamoflegacy.com for resources to assist you on your journey to financial independence. Hello. Welcome back to the Dreamers Podcast. I am your host, Anne-Lyse Wealth. I'm so thankful that you decided to tune in for today's episode. If you've been listening from the beginning, I am so thankful for you. If you're new, welcome, and I hope you stick around. And if you like what you hear, please drop us a review on Apple Podcasts. Today's episode is a solo episode. I recently wrote an article for Personal Capital about my husband and I's journey to reaching Coast Fire, and I've received so many questions and comments that I thought it would be a good idea to talk about the FIRE movement in this episode, what it means, what I think about it. So here are my thoughts about the FIRE movement. 5 or 6 years ago, I was browsing through the internet and I discovered the FIRE movement. The first person that I found out about was Mr. Money Mustache. And he was an engineer who had retired in his early 30s with enough money for him, his wife, and their kid, based on their living expenses, to continue to live the exact same life that they were living without having to work. The one thing that intrigued me the most about Mr. Money Mustache is that even though him and his wife were making good money, they weren't rich, but yet they were able to retire, both of them in their 30s. And so I was very intrigued. And then I read the book, Your Money or Your Life. I discovered that there were a bunch more people that were part of this movement called the FIRE movement, which stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. I was at a point in my life where I was ready for something different professionally. And though I wasn't necessarily looking to retire early, just knowing that there was a whole movement of people out there who were able to retire early in their 30s, 40s, and not having to wait until traditional retirement age to have freedom. So that was my introduction to the FIRE movement. And what FIRE provided is a simple framework, which essentially is about saving a large percentage of your annual income so you can be more intentional about saving and investing in your retirement. Most people take advantage of their company's 401k, maybe save 10, 15, even 20% of their income. But with the FIRE movement, some people save and invest up to 70% of their annual income. Of course, that's on the extreme side, but there are people out there who actually doing it. With FIRE, what you do is you have to first get a good grasp of your annual expenses, right? So let's say your annual expenses are $50,000. With the FIRE movement, you will multiply your annual expenses by 25 to reach financial independence. So it will be $1.25 million. And I know more than one person is probably listening right now thinking, well, I don't have $1.25 million just sitting around. And that's not how FIRE works. But essentially, you start from your financial independence number, which in this case will be 1.25 million. The first assumption here is that the stock market has returned about 10% of annual return for the past 100 years. If you factor in inflation, you're probably somewhere around 8% of return. So you are assuming that when you invest your money every year, it will give you back an 8% return after inflation. The second assumption is that you will withdraw every year, once you've reached your financial independence number, 4% of your portfolio. So what that means is that essentially, once you've reached $1.25 million invested, then you can withdraw money every year to cover your expenses, which is $50,000, without ever having to touch your principal balance. So those are the two most important assumptions behind the calculation. And it's not perfect, but it's a great starting point. One of the things that usually go up during retirement is medical expenses. So you have to do some research so that you can factor in a much higher expense line for your medical expenses. You know, if you have paid off your mortgage by the time you retire, it will decrease your expenses. So it's a great starting point to just have an idea of where you stand. So if you look right now at your annual expenses and multiply by 25, that's your FIRE number. Does that mean you retire when you reach that number? No. It simply means that once you've reached that number, you should have enough so that you don't necessarily have to work to live. You will just live off of your yearly withdrawals from the accumulated investments that you have. Now, there are levels to FIRE. There's such a thing as lean FIRE, which is more so what we're talking about here. Your annual expenses times 25. With lean FIRE, frugality is very important. You live on a lean budget. You spend less than the average person. Then there's something called fat FIRE. Fat FIRE is the opposite side, where you have achieved FIRE, but you spend more than the average person. So maybe it will be your annual expenses times 33. For other people, it's times 36. And there are a lot of studies behind it, and I'm happy to point you to my blog. I have an article called Achieving Financial Independence, and it will go into more detail. I also talk about the FIRE movement in my book, Dream of Legacy. So definitely, if you're intrigued, you can check both of those resources out at dreamoflegacy.com. But to get back to fat FIRE, it gives you the freedom to live the lifestyle that you want to live, and it doesn't have to include frugality. This type of FIRE is for people who want more money in retirement, to live a more comfortable lifestyle, to take care of their family and have more peace of mind when it comes to finances. So you're probably thinking, okay, so, well, first of all, how do I invest money so that it can grow to my financial independence number? And most people who are part of the FIRE movement go with low-cost index funds. Usually a great starting points are funds that track the stock market. So something like an S&P 500 index fund or a total market index fund. Those are offered by all of the discount brokerage firms like Vanguard, Fidelity, Charles Schwab. They each have their individual index fund. And what's great about it is that it's, first of all, it's low cost. So you don't pay as much in management fees. And if it's a total market index fund, it will track the entire market. If it's an S&P 500, it will track 500 large corporations listed on the U.S. Stock Exchange. There are also industry-specific index funds, but most people who are part of the FIRE movement start off with the simple funds that track an index. Another important piece of the puzzle is to determine how much you need to invest every month to be able to reach that financial independence number. That depends on when you plan to retire. And once you have that information, then you can work backwards from there using an investment calculator, and I'll link to one in the episode show notes. If you've been around for a while, then you know how much I care about financial freedom for all. One thing that often gets in the way of that is debt. That's why I'm happy to announce that I've partnered with an amazing organization called Juno. Juno helps you get lower interest rates by using the power of group negotiation. It is a completely free resource that you can use to secure lower interest rates on new and existing student loans. Head to the link in the episode show notes to find out more. Sunday, Skincare Day, is one of the ways I keep my sanity in these crazy times. Jumino is an all-natural, Black-owned skincare brand carefully handcrafted by parents who could not find the proper care solutions to address their family skin problems. All Jumino products are made of organic and high-quality ingredients, meticulously chosen to give your skin the smooth results and the glow it deserves. So back to the article that I wrote for Personal Capital. It was really about my family's journey to reaching Coast Fire, which Coast Fire is essentially the idea is that you have enough money saved so that you can coast through retirement without having to continue to put money away and invest towards your retirement. So that means that until retirement, though, you do have to figure out how to earn a living, but there is less pressure to do work that doesn't necessarily fulfill you. And for my husband and I, that gave us the opportunity, and especially me, to switch my career. And now I am writing, and I am a financial coach, and I am literally doing work that I would do for free, simply because I feel secure in the fact that when it comes to our retirement, we don't have to go as hard as we did in the past. And so for us, because we're more interested in a fat fire approach, we still are pretty aggressive when it comes to investing. But just knowing that you have the flexibility gave us a lot more freedom. Backtracking to when I discovered the FIRE movement, I was more so interested in aggressively cutting expenses and saving as much as we could, invest so that we could retire early as soon as possible. But we switched to a slow fire approach, which means we are focusing on enjoying the journey to financial independence rather than simply the end goal of retiring early. In a nutshell, that's the FIRE movement. What really attracted me to it is not necessarily the retire early part, it's just reaching a point in your life when you don't have to work for money anymore, where you are financially independent, when you know that all of your expenses are covered by your passive income. And my biggest takeaway from the FIRE movement is spending money on the things that truly bring you joy, truly add to your life, not just temporarily. And for me, I'm big on experiences. So I am not one of those people who will just save every single penny that I have. I will gladly spend on experiences, but that comes after making sure that my investment goals, saving goals are met. I would love to hear your thoughts about the FIRE movement. Send me a DM. I'm on Instagram. Reach out to me via email. I'm at hello@dreamoflegacy.com and let me know what you think. I also wanted to take the time today to talk about some of the things that have happened in my life over the past month. I've been writing a lot more for various publications, and two of the pieces that I wrote this past month were highlighting two Black women who are changing the game in different industries. It was my way of using my voice to help women who are doing great things gain more attention. One of them is Devon Reeves. She is a 34-year-old who, along with her business partner, became the two youngest Black women to co-own a hotel under a major hotel chain. And as I was talking to her and interviewing her, one of the statistics that really caught my attention is that less than 1% of Black women are hotel owners. And so I was more than happy to write a piece to highlight what Devon Reeves was doing. I wrote the article for Next Advisor, which is Time's financial platform. And to my surprise, it made it to Time's newsletter. If you haven't listened to Devon Reeves' interview on the Dreamers podcast, I suggest that you go back and listen to it. It's episode 14, and it is full of jams. Also, this past month, I wrote an article for Business Insider about Ellie Diop, a 28-year-old who used her stimulus check to build an online business. And in 10 months, her business generated $1.3 million in revenue. And that article went viral. It was translated in so many different languages. If you haven't listened to Ellie Diop's episode on the podcast, which was episode 7, I suggest that you go back and listen to it. She was so transparent about the methods that she used to build a successful online business. And since the podcast episode, she's taken it to the next level. And I'm actually thinking about bringing her back for another episode. So if you have questions for Ellie, let me know. I'll include both of these articles in the episode show notes. And I'm so glad that by joining forces as women, me telling these women's stories, we individually gained more traction career-wise. And it reminded me of last week's episode with Susan McPherson about building community and how it can help you build a successful business, but also a quote from Tony Robbins, which goes like this: grace comes when you do something that serves more than yourself. I think that's exactly where I want to end this episode. Let's support one another, uplift each other so that we can all go further. All right. Thank you for listening. Please make sure to tune in on Friday for a bonus episode. Coming up on the podcast, we have economist turned high fashion designer, Safietou Seck, personal finance podcaster and educator, Marcus Garrett, and so many more amazing guests. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Dreamers Podcast. You can find today's show notes and all of the links mentioned during the episode at dreamoflegacy.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, here's what you can do to support me and help more dreamers discover the podcast. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. I read every single review, and I'll select one review to read on the podcast every month. Subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Share the podcast with your family, friends, and coworkers. And if you really enjoyed today's episode, tag me on Instagram at thedreamers.podcast and let me know what you liked about it. All right, dreamers, that's it for today. I will see you back here next week for another episode of the Dreamers Podcast.
Okay, dreamers, time to build this legacy.
This podcast is for general information purposes only. It is not intended to provide any tax, legal, financial planning, insurance, accounting, investment, or any other kind of professional advice or services. Please consult with an appropriate tax, financial, or legal professional to receive appropriate advice based on your situation.